And hopefully it all works. Greetings and welcome to the Ermitinger House for Pride Month. I took a chance with the city and with the organization I'm part of, and I thought since it's Pride Month we need to discover that we've been here all along.
Yeah, I love it. Original story.
And I'm pleased to say I met with no resistance and lots of enthusiasm from the city and from the top leadership of my organization. I'm with the Friends of the Ermitinger House.
Oh,
I'm on the board.
Okay.
And actually, shameless promotion. Membership applications are on the table there. We love to have new members. The donation jar will be split between the city's fund for the house and the Friends group. So this is totally free, you're under no obligation, but I won't twist arms, but we love to get cash in there to help support the house's programs. So that's it for the advertisement. I'm going to try not to be overly political about things because that's not what this is about. But politics comes into some of the difficulty I've had with research. There are two really outstanding research projects that were done with national parks in, I'm not sure if it was Custer or it was in Cody, Wyoming area, and the other one down in the San Diego area. And all of that was to be on their website. They have it all digitized. And when you go to those sites now, sorry, this page is no longer available.
Is that right?
Yep, so the algorithms to clean off everything that mentions LGBTQ, women, people of color, you name it, is gone, just like it is on all the rest of the government sites. So that was a major problem. A lot of the information I have comes from articles in the little book looking in here. This is Peter Boas. He's a historian at the University of Washington, Vancouver campus, and he does a lot of work with the Oregon Historical Society. I bought these in their bookstore. So, and then there's another website I got some information off of as well. And other than that, it was really difficult to find lots of information about pre-statehood. Now there's more starting in the 1880s or 90s and up into the early 20th century, but not so much earlier. And part of the problem is Victorian and other historians didn't like the fact that the Wild West was as free and progressive in some ways as it actually was. So they eliminated anything they didn't like. It makes it more of a challenge. And fortunately, more research is being done. If I could spend another 6 months on this, I might get a little more information. But, and I have down here, what are your thoughts on experiences regarding research in this period? But I think that's something we can look at again at the end of the presentation. And I have a bachelor's. Well, first of all, my name is William Becker. I should have done that at the beginning, sorry. I actually do public speaking a lot. I'm not usually that forgetful. Although at least they remember my name and why I'm here. That's an inside joke for Holly. Because she forgot me last night. and I have a master's in public administration, bachelor's in history, and I'm also a medium, and that's teaching and readings and such are my retirement gig type thing. And so as such, and as a gay man, I get a lot of contact from when I'm visiting places from men who the word homosexual wasn't developed at that point, and the concept as we know it wasn't really in existence, but that was that's who they were. It's just a different outlook, a different name for it at the time. And I'm only half joking when I say they're the only ones that want to date me, but it's interesting because some of them, especially a little later, as the West was less wild and more, quote, civilized, and towns were building more, population was growing, trains were more available everywhere, the telegraph was more available. The attitude started changing, and so some of the later ones just want to have somebody that can relate to them to talk to, because they had to be very careful later. And whereas the early ones, that wasn't quite as much of an issue. Let's see, did I do that right? Yeah. Okay. Like I said, the concept of homosexuality wasn't really known in the 19th century. It was 1869. For the first time, the word homosexuality was used or created, but it wasn't used as an identity. It was used more as an activity or something a little more general. It would be two people in a same-sex activity. I don't even know that it would be a relationship. In the Victorian world, sex was ideally for reproductive purposes, not for fun, not for intimacy, that kind of thing. And anybody who liked having sex was deviant or perversion. That's the word I was looking for. And so, sex, like I said, sex for the sake of sex just wasn't something that was recognized as a norm. Whereas earlier out here, it seems to have been. When people first came out here, the whole idea of the West was that it's free. And that included on lifestyle, sexuality, ways of being. Now, there were lots of problems with that, as well as lots of benefits. To say it was the Wild West and pretty rough and tough was very accurate. But nobody cared. Homosexuality was as prevalent then out here as it is now. And that's a big change from the East Coast, where the mores were very more English, think Oscar Wilde, and were so much less tolerant. And yes, men and women were having the relationships, but they had to be much more careful. Men especially. Women get away with a lot more along these lines in that time than the men did. And I'm not quite sure what that was about. But the idea then too, and this is what one of the books I held up is about, a lot of people during the period cross-dressed. Men as women and women as men. And some of this was because people were born in the wrong body then, just like now. Some of it has to do with safety. women that wanted to travel alone needed to look like a pretty tough man, or they weren't going to make it. Men and women both cross-dress to create crime. But there are cases that I'll talk about too where it was the way people lived. Sometimes it was a matter of employment. There are cases of incredibly strong lumberjacks who were beating up everybody in the bar fight and you name it, dying in their 80s as rough and tough, and it turns out they were a woman, not a man. They lived their whole adult life as a man. It's amazing how many couples didn't seem to know they were married to the same sex. I'm not quite sure what all that was about. But again, the mores were different for a lot of people, and people didn't get naked in front of each other as much.
Yeah.
I'm still not sure how my very Victorian grandmother or great-grandmother managed to get pregnant and have my grandmother.
Yeah, especially with
She was very prudish about most everything.
Right.
I think we can go on to the next one here. And many people, cross-dressers, did come through the Wild West, and it was part of everyday occurrence. Those that were known to be were accepted for who they are, for the most part. There just wasn't a big deal during the early days. And it was later in the 19th century that it became seen to be the sign of deviance. And again, that's after quote, civilization comes out here. The cities are coming in, the East Coast ideas and people are flooding in. And then we have the writers and the historians, myth makers, sexologists, filmmakers, even up through the 20th century, totally ignoring it, writing it out of existence. How many Westerns do you know where the male hero is actually a woman, or the heroine is actually a man? And in reality, that wasn't uncommon. But okay, some of the fairly well-known people, that women particularly, that lived a different life, or that dressed as men, lived as men. We have Joe Moynihan in Idaho, who was another one of those rough and tough guys who worked in very demanding ways, was the terror of the bar room, or the bar room brawl anyway. California had Charlie Parkhurst, who, again, everybody thought was a well-respected man. And Colorado had Mountain Charlies. And basically these are women who worked in the mountains as men. Often they would be miners, all kinds of things. So it's also an example of we need to get over our identification that we still have with which gender does what and is responsible for what. Everybody can do anything they want to, as long as they put their heart and soul into it and do, and train, you know. Let's go on here. And then John Runk. Okay, he's a little outside of our time period, but he dressed as a woman, he lived as a woman his whole life. He was, I should say she, was a photographer in Stillwater, Minnesota, and remained single all her life. And because of his dedication to his craft and his interest in the surroundings, and the time he had, because he was unattached, he took thousands and thousands of photographs of Minnesota scenes and preserved countless historic images of the area, and images of himself in women's clothing, and including the one here where he's at the sewing machine. So these are people living regular lives. This is kind of a collage of several different pictures, and I've got them broken out, but I'll go through a little bit here. A couple more different people to talk about here too is there was a Montana lumberjack. This is the one I was actually talking about, Sammy Williams, who died in 1908, and it was then that it was discovered he was a woman. There's another really famous case. Okay, I'll go through these. This is a cowboy dance in the Old West, and there weren't a lot of women, so they took turns. That's Oscar Wilde. This is a story or a picture of how Native people liked or thought about Two-Spirit as what this is supposed to have been. And I'm not quite sure what this is depicting actually, but it's supposed to be very positive. And I'll talk more about them later. And this one is, this one is the life of a lonely miner. Well, it doesn't look too lonely to me. And this are two women in what's known as a Boston marriage. And this started out actually in the 18th century, late 18th century in the Boston area. And it was women who had independent means, who didn't want to be with men, who formed same-sex couples. Now, how much of this was physical intimacy in any of these relationships and how much wasn't? I mean, we don't know everybody's details that way. But the love, the companionship, and often the physical intimacy were part of it. But these were known about, but again, nobody cared because it wasn't talked about. And these were women of means, so they had some standing in the community, and that helped them get away with things that others couldn't. And they usually lived pretty quietly away from the main hubbub of everything. And then this is a picture of the cowboy dances. And a lot of times for these dances, some of the group of men would wear a bandana saying they'll take the female role. The ones without it would be the male role in the dance. Because I know it's confusing doing a ballroom type of a dance when you're used to leading. I speak from experience back in my ballroom dance days. And then this is Susan B. Anthony, who was also, she wasn't what we would now call a lesbian. She certainly had very close, intimate relationships with a lot of women, or a few in particular. And this suffragette movement seemed to have quite a lot of that at the time, which was a total surprise to me. I hadn't realized that. Okay, Now, this is the Two-Spirit, the Native American culture. And I reached out to the tribes of Grand Ronde because my DNA is as white as it comes. It's all Northern and Western European. I am not qualified to talk for them. And I went to an exhibit they had at the museum on Two-Spirit, but it was all about two, maybe three 19th century people. And I talked to the curator of the museum, and she was all excited about participating. She was going to talk to somebody with the board, get back with, contact and everything. She didn't get back, so I called and left a message with staff 4 times for her, and a message for her once on voicemail. I never heard back a word. She was excited at first. I don't know what happened. But basically, what I have found is consistent. Very little, but it all says the same thing. There were, one of the names that the Zuni people used was Berdash, or Berdashi, I'm not quite sure the pronunciation, as the label for Two-Spirit people. 130 tribes that are documented across the country as honoring these people, and most of those, the Two-Spirit people, were held in high regard. They were thought to have special powers, and there was the Zuni, for example, believed that men that were skilled in the women's arts and women skilled in male activities combined the two sexes, and they were valued in Native society. In some of the societies too, they were also considered then to have more spiritual awareness and contact with the other side and the beyond. And they lived the more special life. And even during the more open days of homosexuality in the Wild West, pre-statehood for men and women here, it was never that open. These people didn't have to hide. And the people here weren't hiding, they were active in daily life, but it wasn't talked about. So, and this is, here it is, Wiwa. And again, I know this is a terrible mispronunciation. She's a Two-Spirit Zuni princess who met President Grover Cleveland. I mean, these were people in pretty high regard. And I have missed a couple of slides in here someplace. But, and let's see. Okay, yeah, there are a couple of things that I forgot. Or I know I had slides if I thought, and I don't see them. One of the most extraordinary cases, or well-documented cases, is regarding George Armstrong Custer and his wife. George Custer had a washerwoman for years doing laundry and different things. And when they got to Fort Lincoln, the 7th Cavalry, one of the corporals, John Noonan, had married a woman, or married this woman. She had been married to several different men before, and she baked delicious pies. She was the fort's midwife. She had a nurturing manner with pregnant wives and of the soldiers, and always asked if you're comfy. And they were happily married for many years, till one day he came home back from a scouting expedition, and she had died.
Oh.
On her deathbed, Mrs. Noonan had asked or begged that her body be buried directly and not bathed and prepared for burial. But Mrs. Custer and the ladies did not take heed of her request. And when Mrs. Custer left to pick wildflowers for her dear friend, she returned only to discover that Mrs. Noonan had been in fact a man. And for John Noonan, after bereft of the loss of his wife, I also think the discovery perhaps that she was a man, killed himself several days later. And Elizabeth Custer was not judgmental. He said, poor old dear, she said of Mrs. Noonan, I hope she's finally comfy. And this is just another example of the acceptance so many people have. And when we think of Custer, we do not exactly think of him as a very understanding, progressive person. I can't think the Native Americans would agree with that. It's interesting when you go to Custer's Last Stand, the park and battlefield, and yeah, it's, anyway, and it's a very disturbing place. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
I don't really have any, well, I've got a couple questions, a couple thoughts.
Okay.
'Cause I watch a lot of Westerns, I watch a lot of historical shows.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're saying, does fit. Because of the times, and from what I've seen, if you're either an unmarried woman or a widowed woman,
Mm-hmm.
your choices of employment were either washing dishes or working in a saloon. And if that wasn't your deal, then they would be almost forced, to do what they truly wanted to do, which was man's work as a man.
Right.
And I remember I don't remember if it was a movie or a series, there was this woman, and she was actually a lesbian. And I mean, this is set, it's a movie on TV, so they're aware of this, because I've seen several movies where, I mean, it's out there.
Good. And, it's,
and it
it's
made me
becoming,
happy to hear you say that.
Yeah, because it's becoming more acknowledged
Right,
as
but
we
these
become
were
more.
even older. I'm talking about movies from anywhere from the 1940s. We're talking black and white.
Oh,
And
that's
the
pretty
40s, they
unusual.
were terrible. You can't to see the picture.
Uh-huh.
And, up to the 60s.
Okay.
And I mean, when you think about Stonewall, that was
69.
69. So whomever was making these motion pictures at the time was probably one of us.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only, because there are some out there. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't remember what else I was going to say, but I found that to be interesting. I don't quite understand the two-spirited thing. I'm trying to figure it out in a tribe, I guess I could call it. If a woman, so in other words, a squaw,
Mm-hmm.
had feelings for another squaw or wanted to be a brave, how would they do that based on how you see them dress? When you look at history or historical pictures and such, I mean, usually they're bare-chested or, it's like a loincloth kind of deal. So,
Well, a lot of that is not,
fiction?
Yeah, a lot of it's fiction.
Fake?
And by the way, I know you don't mean it this way, but
Oh.
the terms squaw and brave are actually quite pejorative these days.
Yeah, well, I
They-
knew that, but I couldn't think of
Right.
she's a real
Male or female.
sociologist, so.
Male or female, okay, great. And anyway,
I don't even know if tribes is bad. Native Americans.
Yeah, but I think it was just because they were so open it didn't matter. And people would understand. They didn't have to live quietly. They were accepted fully as who they are. And a couple of things that I didn't have pictures of too is a lot of men in the West formed bachelor marriages where you had two men living together. You often had two men sharing a narrow cot in bunkhouses or in their own house or all kinds of things. The physical closeness and intimacy that way was not at all uncommon and not thought badly about. But again, it wasn't talked about. You would have men setting up their own households, and sometimes it's necessity because you're out working someplace. But most of the time, it didn't seem to be out of necessity. It was out of desire. And again, it's hard to say how much of that desire goes into physical intimacy other than closeness and understanding and companionship in a deeper way. Gender orientation isn't about having sex, it's about everything. And we don't have a lot of good information that I could find about the details of that, but it was common. And you know, one of the things about Lincoln even that I've heard is people wondered sometimes about him because it wasn't uncommon for male good friends to share a bed together when they visited each other or whatever. But Lincoln did a lot with a couple of people in particular. And did it mean anything or not? The idea was different then than we have it now. One of the things, as somebody, I refuse to call myself a historian. I have only the 1 degree. I'm not a professional. I have far too much respect for the field. But one of the things that I have learned is we cannot place our common current day thinking on the past or our values and morals on the past. It was a different time and a different way of living, and yes, the people were just like us, but what works inside is not always the same because of their own experiences. Everything that shapes us shaped them too. Man forms who they were as it forms who we are. So,
why was being homosexual so demonized? I mean, I found the concept with like the Native Americans being very accepting, you know, and then there's cultures in our past that have been very accepting, but you know, Western, white, you know, 1800s even today, it's very demonized. Is it like religion? Is that what kind of did it?
That's my thinking on it from what I've come up with. It's social morals based on a misunderstanding of the Christian,
right?
I say so-called Christian Bible. Dr. Dan McClellan I'm a big fan of his. He was actually in Portland with a book signing last month before. And I get his videos on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. And he's a critical Bible scholar. His motto is data over dogma. And he pulls apart all of this, including, he's a big LGBTQ plus advocate. And he pulls apart the scriptures that people use to keep women down, to keep, vilify LGBTQ plus, to anything. And he does so much good if the right people are actually paying attention. So there are some people out there really fighting this, and he's actually a Mormon.
What's his name again?
Dan McClellan.
Dan McClellan.
Yeah, and a lot of what he says goes very much against the teaching of the Mormon Church. He hasn't gotten in trouble yet, he says. Some of the critical Bible scholars that have been Mormons have been kicked out of the church. But yeah, good questions.
What were like the consequences in, like, you know, the 19th century if you were outed Or, I mean, is there any documentation of, I don't want to put,
Put them in jail.
yeah,
or,
I saw it was like
Yeah.
hard feather or something,
Yeah, tar and feather. That,
that's a different time. I was just kind of curious, like, people, would
you,
they be killed? Would they be jailed? Would they?
ostracized. For
you,
sure.
it depends on where you are in the situation. It could be that you're thrown in prison. It could be that you're ostracized. I'm not aware of the death penalty, but I'm sure a lot of people were lynched or something
like
anyway.
Western justice kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, not here during the early days, but in the East, and then later here as societies here came. And, well, people need a scapegoat. People in Western European background countries are not willing to take responsibility for themselves and their actions and the outcomes. And that goes way, way back. This didn't start with Hitler and Mussolini, and it didn't start with what's going on now. It's age-old. You create and vilify an other that gives you power, and you can control and direct that power how you want. And like I said, I won't get political. But it's hard not to these days. Really good questions and thoughts. Any more thinking from any of you on maybe how things develop, why own experiences or own experience trying to do research, if not on this topic, others, and running into lack of information, and especially because information has been sort of demolished.
I've heard that was happening, but it's still shocking to know that you have actually experienced it recently. Yeah.
And that's why I mentioned some of this stuff in my own orientation. I mean, it's only a piece of who I am. I identify as William, all of it. And I identify more as a spiritual being than I do as a gender orientation. But sometimes it helps that people know that they're looking at somebody who's had these experiences, whatever. And this program would have been a lot more in depth and longer if I could have had access to what I was looking for.
I know that historically there's a publishing house, Bella Books, that I have over the years had a chance to pull up some just short little novels, but the novels have been on lesbian relationships based in the mid 19th century that talked about them coming from the East, traveling, what decisions they had to make as part of that trip, how they then established themselves in communities, how it went from initially being very secretive, but then as relationships developed within those communities, they were able to relax and become more of themselves. And they're just a whole series of books, but Bella Books will give you a fictional resource to look at some of the relationships of that period.
Oh, excellent. That's good to know.
What I'd be interested in too is, when I'm thinking East and West, I'm thinking unless you were an affluent female in the East, I don't see how you could pull it off. If you wanted to be, be dressed as a male or, do any of that. And so maybe that's why they came to the West, to get away and maybe, gain that freedom. Because
that's a big part of why they came out here, because they wanted to live their true life.
Right.
And sometimes that was because they identified as male, but sometimes it wasn't that so much as they wanted to explore and travel and have adventure on their own. Or they liked physical labor of being a lumberjack or a miner or whatever. And my grandmother used to she would talk about the old country, and she'd get so mad at her sisters because they didn't want to do any work in the house. No, that's what maids are for. And grandma, was out with the hired help in the fields and such, and cooking for them and everything. But you get a group that I'm sorry, I just totally lost. I also have ADHD, so boom.
That happens.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
But no, I think it's interesting. Oh yeah, I think there's a lot of all of that comes by. There isn't just one answer or one cause of anything. And historical novels that are well researched and the history is good can really give a good, accurate picture of the time and place and the people. A friend of mine who's an archaeologist, he just retired, but his last gig was at Stonehenge. And he's specialized in Bronze Age Neolithic. And he wrote a novel based on the Amesbury archer who was found close to Salisbury. And I've seen the archer and such. And it's based on the moving in of the Beaker people from the continent who brought metalworking with them. They're the ones that brought copper work and bronze work into the area and a whole new style of pottery. And he created this man's life based on the history that we know to help explain how that all worked. And Tim Roby, I Have Time, I can't remember the name exactly, but it's an incredible book.
I love historical fiction.
Yeah, James Michener had done some on Israel in a couple places that went way back, Stone Age, and yeah.
When we lived in California, we used to go to, they had this thing, it was called Real Pride.
Uh-huh.
And for, like over a week, they would, each day, it was all about movies or films. And Saturday was documentaries. And I know this is it's more current than what you're talking about, but they actually interviewed these two women that were living together, buying a house together. Now back then, and I'm talking about, this is black and white, so this is,
right.
80 years ago, I guess. And when, I guess it happened to a friend of theirs or another couple, one died. Now, they had both been paying for the house. However, when the one died, then the family came in, kicked the other one out, and said, that it was their...
That's right.
And there was nothing to protect them. Now, thank God, and it hasn't really been that long, we now have protections.
So far.
Until they take them away.
They're working on it. The Supreme Court said that it was a wrong decision. Well, Alito and Thomas said it's a wrong decision and they would like to revisit it if somebody brings the case.
We got our minute.
But, so, we have to keep pushing. The only way you could do it back then was through contracts and documents and wills.
Yep.
And people didn't always think of it, or they didn't think of it in time. And that happened to so many people. You lose your home of 30, 40, 50 years. Yeah. You lose your investment. So you've lost your life partner and you've lost everything else. And, in some cases, the person that survived had been the stay-at-home spouse.
Right. Probably why cross-dressing was so prevalent, man, just to keep up the image,
Oh, yeah.
I would imagine there was a certain amount of that, especially when you could make it work. And man's inhumanity to man is a well said, a well coined phrase. This is great. I really appreciate everybody coming and having some conversation and discussion, and
Especially on a day like this, yes, and to support, all the people in the world.
yeah, thank you. And you know, for me, it's not. I speak about my experience and things that I'm part of, but it's about everybody. We're all in this together, and frankly, we're all under attack in different ways. I don't mean to make anything about one group. It's just, this is one I can put some highlight on. I could put highlights on other ones too, but this is Oregon City. It's not noted for its liberalism, although it's a lot better than when I was a kid in this town. Most of my life I lived in Portland as an adult. My adult life was stints in San Francisco and England. And moving back here has been a challenge. And Clackamas County, although it's so much better than it used to be.
It must be.
Yeah, I mean, we moved here in '63 when I started first grade, and my dad started teaching at Gardner. So it's changed a lot since then. So.
I was just going to mention that the center of liberalism in Oregon City is right here.
That's true.
At the church?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Unitarian Universalist Church.
I always
So-
like their signs.
That church also has the only known complete collection of signed Povey glass windows,
Yeah.
which the Povey brothers were the Tiffany of the West Coast, and that glass collection is probably the most valuable thing in the town.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I didn't either.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah.
And it raised our insurance like 400% this year.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah. They just had the 100th anniversary of the building.
Yeah,
I went to that. It was great.
Yeah.
That's where I learned that.
Yeah.
Tidbit.
Okay, cool.
My house used to sit there. My house it was moved over here just a couple
Are
blocks.
you in the Milne house?
I am.
Okay, yeah, that's a neo-Gothic one.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
Oh, cool.
So it used to be where that church is.
Right.
And so that was a lot of fun for me to walk over and
I
listen
bet.
to the lectures and.
Now, do you have any ghost experiences, sir?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Good. And actually, I'm not even sure why I said good. I never met a ghost I couldn't get along with, which is good because I get lots of visitors through my house. And my parents had it built, and nobody's died in it, and it's a subdivision. So it was when I was a kid, it was all fields. But so good was not the right thing. I used to do ghost tours with Rocky Smith's ghost tour company a long time ago, and we pointed out the house because of its style, and it's rather rare and unique these days, and that it had been over here. But I didn't know if there was anything associated with it or not. So
I've been there 11 years. I haven't seen anything.
okay,
Cool house.
yeah, it's beautiful.
You've already been there 11 years.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very, very much.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
And I can hang around for a little bit if anybody wants to
Okay.
chat or have any other questions or something. And like I said, we certainly have application forms and stuff. And thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
to see
Yeah,
you
nice
both.
to see you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye,
Thank you for
Nice
coming.
to meet you.
Thank you.
How's that?
Everything's still going.
I hope so. We'll find out. Well, it's good to see you ladies back again.
Indeed.
Yeah.